Tim Draper, venture capitalist and founder of Draper University of Heroes. Welcome to Draper University of Heroes. This school is quite unique. On another occasion, I'm willing to discuss what we do here, but we'll save that for another time. For now, I'd like you to know that I've been working to improve California for many years. I grew up here in the Silicon Valley and watched the amazing platform that was California allow enterprising people to transform apricot orchards into the booming region you see here. I had the huge advantage of being educated in what was the best school system in the country. I was surrounded by the best infrastructure in the country. There was a can-do spirit throughout the state. That has changed. By the 1990s, California had dropped to the 40-somethingth state and has continued to plummet when it comes to education. The infrastructure that 40 years ago was state-of-the-art is falling apart as the electric grid and the highways and the waterways have been neglected. Something's not working in our state, and I'm convinced that it is with the existing system, the existing breadth of industry and varying interests. California is untenable and ungovernable. There have been many good people governing our state for many years, and they've worked very hard for Californians, but the results are horrendous. We are the state that charges the most for the worst service. We're simply too big and bloated. This is not the fault of anyone. This has just happened. The status quo is not going to work for us. I'm convinced that the best path for Californians is to create 6 new states that will be unencumbered by trying to balance the interests of people who have very divergent goals and aspirations. The new plan for Californians is to create 6 new states that can reset and freshen the approach for governing. The best plan for Californians is to allow people the chance to create more local, more representative governments who can lay the groundwork for better education, better infrastructure, and a better chance for prosperity. I know change is hard for people, but the California slide is accelerating, and it will only get worse. Sure, we're going to have economic bursts that make us feel like things are fine again, but each downturn will be worse than the last if we don't change our system. 6 Californias is an opportunity. An opportunity for Californians to get a fresh start. An opportunity for Californians to build new platforms for growth and prosperity. An opportunity to be awesome. 6 Californias give 6 diverse regions the opportunity to tailor their governments to their populations, stay close to their constituents, and through cooperation and competition can improve governance generally. I was on the State Board of Education in 1999. I drove a failed school voucher initiative in 2000, so this isn't my first rodeo. I started a nonprofit called BizWorld to teach young kids how business and entrepreneurship work in hopes that we could save the next generation. And started Draper University of Heroes to encourage more entrepreneurship. But now I am convinced that the status quo is not cutting it for our schools, our businesses, our infrastructure, or our people. I'm not the first to recognize this problem with the status quo. The people in our northernmost region are creating a movement to create their own state called Jefferson. Some leaders in the southernmost region are creating a movement to create their own state called South California. I've heard skirmishes from people who want the Central Valley to be its own state, and here in the Silicon Valley, people feel that the state is out of touch. My plan is to work to help to get this initiative on the ballot. After that, it will be up to Californians to take the ball and spread the word. The status quo is dying and sucking the life out of us. But Californians are still the greatest, most innovative people on the planet, and I ask them to innovate their government back to health and prosperity. Thank you. So, if you guys have any questions, or are there any questions from the media out there in Streamcast land, you can go ahead and ask, or I can kind of go through the questions and answers that we've got from some of the questions that yes?
Can I start? There's been a history of initiatives to break up California over the years, not recently. Why now? Is there anything particular about the timing that makes this the right time to bring the idea back?
You know, I think it just, I mean, it hit me now. I never really thought, you know, when I know Becky Morgan and some other people were working to break it into 3 parts about 15 years ago, I didn't really see it then. But I think now it's been a grassroots thing. Now it's been something that's come from these people up north in Jefferson that want to break off and work with some Oregon counties and do their own thing. And the people in South California who want to break away and run their own state. And then the people in the Central Valley, they're sort of overwhelmed by the regulations and they want a different kind of government. And then the people in Silicon Valley really need a government that is technologically savvy. So I think it's just time. It feels like it's just the right time. And I just think maybe it just hit me, and I tend to be early. But I think now's the time.
And if this particular initiative doesn't move forward with full breakup, how many of the problems that you've identified could be solved by greater localization? Governor Brown has talked about more localization. Is that ultimately a more practical kind of
Well, so I'm hoping the initiative passes. Between the time the initiative passes and the time the federal government recognizes the 6 states, there will be a time where each of those new states, or each of the counties in those states, will be able to, in effect, choose the state that is appropriate for them. There may be a few counties that decide that there's a government that's better for them, and these lines could change a little. We broke them up according to what our best feeling was for how the state would, how the various states would best operate. And, but I think we're going to leave that open to the county. So if it does not pass, I think it'll potentially bring up some important issues. I think each of these individual states is going to be get more and more involved in the idea of what would our state look like if we were independent of California. And I think that feeling is going to be a very powerful one for people. And I think they're going to get more and more interested in doing this, realizing that they can start fresh. And we're going to encourage that with some crowdsourcing of state, in effect, a new way of operating the state. So, and the crowdsourcing, I suspect that in West California, the crowd will source one type of government, and in Central California, it'll be another type of government, and in Jefferson, it'll be another type of government. But I think they'll all be much more satisfied with their constitution and their state flag and their feel, and they will be more in touch with their state because they'll be closer to it. There'll be in none of these cases it's more than a 3-hour drive, 2 or 3 hour drive to the center of it. So California is just, I think, just unmanageable now. The status quo is just not going to work. Yes?
You just said that you think the people in Silicon Valley need a government that's more tech savvy. So how do you, if this all works out, what would be different about the government in Silicon Valley than the current California state government at the moment? What kind of things did you envisage when you made that remark?
Well, that's the beauty of it, is that I don't need to come up with it. That's going to be up to all the Californians, and if the Silicon Valley finds a better way to govern, these other states will also be able to benefit from their new knowledge. And so I just think that there are a lot of real, I could go into that in another way, that there are a lot of great ways for new technologies to improve governance. It's happening at a very slow rate. I would suspect that it would happen at a much faster rate if it were very close to the Silicon Valley. And then the word would spread to the other governments, and I think we'd all end up much better off. And getting better service for each of those states.
Well, that's sort of what I was interested in. I understand that the people in each area will make their own decisions, but I was wondering, when you said that you think that Silicon Valley needs a more tech-savvy government, what do you think?
Well, I think whenever I talk to people in Sacramento, they are not really in touch with what we're trying to accomplish in the Silicon Valley. Here we're working on new communication systems that are always several leaps in front of the bureaucracies. So the bureaucracies are all trying to catch up, and we're not quite sure how we should be governed. I can give you a lot of examples of that. We didn't, when we funded Skype didn't know what was legal and what wasn't. When Napster got started, nobody knew what was legal and what wasn't. Bitcoin, nobody knows what's legal and what isn't. I think a more proactive and closer to the action government would be terrific in the Silicon Valley. And likewise, I think one that understands Hollywood and defense contractors would be much better off for West California. And one that understands the medical device industry would be much better off in South California. And one that understands farming and water rights and all sorts of things would be much better in Central California. So I just think that it's a big opportunity. And what I thought was, I'll just lay it out there, and then let's let the Californians decide.
Thank you.
Yes?
How viable do you think the initiative is?
How vital or viral?
Viable.
Viral?
No, viable.
Oh, viable.
Yes.
Oh, we've vetted it for years. We've worked on this for years. It works. It gives people time to figure out what their state's going to look like. It gives counties time to figure out which state they want to be a part of. It gives the federal government time to figure out if they can work in effect 6 new states. So there's plenty of time to implement it, if that's the question. And there's nothing new about this. Ohio broke off from Pennsylvania, and West Virginia broke off from Virginia. South Dakota and North Dakota split. There's nothing really new in any legal way about this.
So there's 2 questions from LiveStream.
Okay.
Media. The first one is, how much of your own money are you going to be putting into this?
Okay, as little as possible, but I think I will make sure it gets on the ballot so that Californians have a chance to make this reality.
And the other question is from TechCrunch. how will congressional representation change? And then how did you decide where to draw the lines for the states?
Well, okay, the first one was what? Sorry, I'm a little jet lagged.
First one is how will congressional representation change?
Oh, it may be, I'm sure the lines will be redrawn and probably in a better way because we're going to have more local control. Right now there are all these very strange gerrymander lines drawn in California, and I think this will be significantly better. And then the other
question was, how did you decide to draw the lines?
It was interesting. It was a natural. It came out in sort of a nice, natural way. We decided to draw the lines based on a combination of political, industrial, population base, and we also knew that that there's a good chance that we did not draw exactly the perfect lines. And so we're allowing counties to say, hey, I belong in Central California, or I belong somewhere else. So we allowed some great flexibility there. It actually looks pretty good too. Why don't we go here first? Yeah.
I was going to say, are there any major economic powers, any major companies, any major lobbying groups supporting this initiative?
We just got started about 4 days ago. But interestingly, we've gotten a lot of grassroots support. It's coming up from below. I haven't heard anything from any big corporations, but I have heard a lot of support from this grassroots group who feels like they're disenfranchised. They're left out of the decision making in Sacramento. They feel like that area is just missing what really is needed in California, and they're saying, "Gosh, I believe so much in more local governments and local control."
So we have another question from the live stream from San Jose Mercury News. If California
Is that Peter?
Yes, it's Peter.
Hey, Peter.
If Californians decide to support this idea, do you expect much resistance from Congress, which would still have to decide whether to implement this?
Right. Congress will have to decide whether to implement this, and I believe that there will be some. I think it's going to be indifference from Congress. I don't really think there's a lot of resistance. I think it'll be indifference. And they'll say, oh, okay, 5 new states, a few new senators, and maybe things will change a little bit. But I don't see that there's a big concern there. It won't get in their face. But what will probably happen is, as this passes, there will be a groundswell. And there will be so much momentum that we assume or hope that the country will recognize that momentum and want to make a few little changes. I know people fear change, but I think they will also recognize that, and I think they'll recognize that governance is going to get better in California, and they're going to recognize that, and they're going to say, wow, this is really working.
And Peter says hi.
You had a question.
Yeah. So we're here in Silicon Valley, albeit you said there's a lot of regulation, nonetheless it's a good time economically, as it is for the state, particularly here. Is there a danger that this will be seen as a plea from the wealthier areas, particularly this wealthy area, to secede?
Oh, to secede? No, I think it's more a grassroots issue. I don't feel like it's a wealth issue. I think every one of these states will become wealthier as a result. I think that's a very important point. I think they will get, what I'm hoping is that each of these states then has sort of a reset, and that, that they create this new platform where each of those states can then thrive and grow, and that everybody else ends up being better off. And so I think it's incredibly good for the people, the current Californians. I think they're going to feel like they're refranchised. They'll be reconnected. And I think, given that 7 different governing bodies will in effect be coming up with new ways of governing, I think they're all going to benefit from all that new knowledge. So some sort of a cooperation competition thing that goes on will really benefit everybody.
But nonetheless, just
I mean, right now, what you really have to get to is the current system has a horrible system of haves and have-nots. It's the status quo that's the problem. That's created this huge difference in haves and have-nots. Politically, economically, access to good education, all those things. They've really created a system that is not working. We all know that. Every Californian, you go down the street in any of these 7 new states, and you will hear from Californians saying, this state is not working for us. And you'll hear it up and down the economic spectrum. Yeah.
So you just said 7 twice in 2 different sentences.
Oh, 6, sorry.
Was there a plan to do 7, and it now became 6, or that was?
No, I just
Okay.
said 7 instead of 6. I miscounted.
And then on the question of each of these new states getting welfare and things, I did some calculations earlier, and I can't remember which one it was, but one of these states will have less than 1 million in population. One will have something like 12 million in population, and you've got a lot of industry down in Los Angeles, Hollywood, in Silicon Valley. For those areas that have fewer people and don't have all of the large companies, how are they going to benefit from this?
They will have much more efficient governments. And they will not have as much of a burden. I mean, currently, those poor regions that you're talking about are supporting all the wealthy regions. And they don't need all that, bureaucracy around them. They are much better off without all those regulations. They'll want different regulations. They'll want a simpler government that costs them less. And then it might be a platform for real growth, and it might attract a lot of great businesses to the region.
But don't those poor areas benefit from tax transfers at the moment, and won't they use them?
If you really dig in, they don't. What happens is a lot of the tax transfer, there's huge friction in the tax transfer. It doesn't all go to the places you would think it would go. And I think you just have to do some research, and you will see that that's the situation. Yeah.
What would the breakdown of senators be like?
Well, two.
If California ends up having more senators than before, how do you think the rest of the United States will take that? Do you think there'll be any opposition based on the idea that they won't want California to have more portion of the vote there?
Well, I think they'll be somewhere between indifferent and nervous about change. I think that's true. But I think they'll see this momentum, and they'll get involved with the momentum. I think that's going to be quite exciting for them. And they'll say, wow, all those states are so much better governed than they were before. Let's have them be a part of our United States. We want them as part of our United States. And I think that's the way they're going to look at it. They're going to see big momentum, they're going to see better governance, and they're going to see a new way of doing things, and they're going to say, okay, is it worth it to have 10% more senators.
How do the Californians having more control over the Senate votes benefit people in the rest of the United States?
Say that again.
How does having more control of the Senate vote distributed to Californians benefit people who live in other parts of the United States? Who live in, North Dakota or Minnesota or Florida or any other part of the United States?
Yeah. Well, I think the question is, do you want those? If the states are already starting to operate independently as states, the question is, do you want those states to be a part of the United States? And the answer is yes, all 6 times. Because there is a huge benefit. I mean, whether they've got an extra couple of votes or not is not the big issue. The big issue is whether this region is a real positive for the rest of America, and it is.
And how do you believe it being more positive for the rest of America when divided up this way?
Well, I think I kind of got into that. I think the idea is that the rest of America is going to see better ways of governing. And I think by watching these 6 new governments come up, I think the rest of America is going to benefit. They're going to say, hey, there are better ways to govern.
Do you believe that other parts of the U.S. would also then divide themselves into smaller states as well in order to obtain governance that more closely aligns with local interests then?
Well, you know what it might do is people might do more refreshes. If certain governments aren't working for them, they might do more refreshes. And whether that ends up being a few more states or whether it ends up just being a group that gets together and says, hey, we may want to refresh our Constitution, or we may want to, get a new way of attracting business to our state, or a new way of attracting citizens to our state, or whatever. So I think, yeah, it's going to be good.
So we have another question from LiveStream. Question is, what is the planned timing for getting this on the ballot?
So we're going to try to get it on for November, and we have submitted to the Attorney General's office, and they write the title and the summary, and so we'll work with them to get a good, fair title and summary. And then once that happens, then we have a period of time to get a little less than 1 million signatures. And so we're going to be, really working hard to get those 1 million signatures. And it's interesting, a lot of people are coming to the site looking to help out and get involved. And so we think that getting those signatures, we might get a lot of them from grassroots. And that would be terrific. And then after that, then the campaign begins, and I assume that at that point, California takes over, and it's a groundswell, and I can back away, and hopefully we'll have some people who really know what they're doing coming here and speaking on the subject. Turns out there are a few people that are starting to speak on the subject, and they do know what they're doing, which is exciting for me. Yeah.
Do you think there's going to be benefit for interstate projects like high-speed rail or waterways? Or like that?
Yeah. Oh, I'm really glad you asked that, because I think that what's going to happen is let's go into a couple of things. All infrastructure, water, electricity, highways, and then maybe this high-speed rail. They all become possibilities if you start fresh. They all become. I think about, people have asked me about water. I'm surprised nobody asked me about water. With the 7, I've said 7 again. With the 6 different states. Well, for one thing, water is always negotiated amongst states. You know, Colorado negotiates with California and Nevada and Oklahoma, and they all have negotiations on water. And I think that same kind of thing will happen. But with these new, fresh-looking states, they can start looking at water in a new way. I mean, we have a horrible, our grid is falling apart, and we can end up with much better electric systems. Our water systems are falling apart. And they move water, and it's all spatially done. No one's thought to do time division on water. No one's thought to do overflow storage on water. There are a bunch of things that are not happening because we're sort of in a state that is, you know, we've rested on our laurels for a long time, and it's really starting to crumble. And the status quo will let it crumble. And I don't want to let it crumble. I want to make it work. And so the high-speed rail, all it has to be is negotiated amongst, well, it depends on where it goes, but the Silicon Valley and West California could negotiate the high-speed rail that was planned between San Francisco and LA. But any of these groups could then start thinking about, well, how would we do it? And I think that feeling of possibilities, that's what I really want to get here. I want people to have that feeling of possibilities. Let's start with a fresh slate and see what can happen. And 6 fresh slates. Good, well, okay. So I'm happy to have another press conference when we get title and summary. And then I'm happy to have another press conference when we get our 1 million signatures. So that's the game, and I look forward to working with you guys. Thank you so much for coming. And if are there any other questions? Because I'm here for a little while longer. Oh, and can we give them your contact information?
So it's in the packet, all the packets, and then I've given almost everyone business
Have you
cards.
given it to the people on the live stream?
Yes, I will give it to them on the live stream right now.
Okay, and then we're going to have at some point soon we're going to have websites on each of these states and Twitter followings and social media of all sorts. And our model is centralcalifornia.info and westcalifornia.info and siliconvalleystate.info and jeffersonstate.info and northcalifornia.info and southcalifornia.info. So those will be the websites. They're not up and running yet, but they will be. And we're hoping to put some crowdsourcing things together so people can come up with new ways of managing their state. Okay? Great. So I'll see you in, I don't know how long it'll take, but 4 or 5 weeks, something like that, when we have our title and summary. Thanks for coming out there in live stream land.